Live report happening today. Former Chicopee Public School Superintendent Lynn Clark, who was accused of lying to the FBI in connection with sending dozens of threatening text messages to a city police chief candidate, is set to be sentenced in federal court.
And Western Mass News reporter Taylor Smith joining us live in studio with more details on this case. Taylor, what can you tell us?
Well, David, Lynn Clark changed her plea to guilty in federal court earlier this year, admitting to 2 counts of making false statements to the FBI. Back in December of 2021, law enforcement received a report that a police chief candidate in Chicopee received nearly 100 threatening texts from unknown numbers, forcing him to withdraw from consideration. Federal investigators later questioned Clark, which she claimed she did not know who sent the text and she never downloaded a burner app to her phone. But in April of 2022, Clark was indicted on 2 counts of making false claims and ultimately relieved of her duties as Chicopee superintendent. She initially pled not guilty to these claims, but in January of this year, Clark later admitted these were both false claims and she did in fact send the messages. And now, after changing her plea to guilty, Clark was able to reach a plea deal with the U.S. Attorney's Office, which includes probation for 1 year, a fine of $1,000, and a mandatory special assessment of $200, which she must pay to the clerk today. And if she did go to trial, Clark would have faced up to 5 years in prison, followed by 1 to 3 years of supervised release and up to $250,000 in fines for each count. Now, Clark is expected to appear in federal court for her sentencing at 2 p.m. today, and we'll have more details on that later on. Reporting live in the studio this morning, Taylor Smith, Western Mass News.